Have you ever walked through life with a silent pain? The feeling that something isn't right, even when everyone around you seems content. You look around and wonder, why doesn't anyone else see it? The emptiness behind the noise, the distractions hiding something deeper. You try to speak about it, not to preach, just to share. But your words fall like echoes in a room already full of sound. The room changes. A silence, a polite smile. Then, quiet. You feel heavy from being misunderstood. Not because you're loud, but because your mind refuses to stay on the surface. And that makes people uncomfortable. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He wrote, "High levels of intelligence tend to make a person difficult to integrate. Not because they withdraw, but because the world withdraws. The truth is, you're not broken. You're not arrogant. You're not too much. You're simply awake." In a world that prefers to sleep, if you've ever felt like an outsider for thinking too deeply, subscribe now, because we're about to explore why intelligence can feel like a burden and how to turn that burden into strength. And if you've ever felt like a silent flame in a room full of sleepwalkers, maybe it's time you finally understand why. There's a discomfort that follows you into every room. Not because you've said something wrong, not because you've offended anyone, but because you think differently. And that alone is enough to disrupt the balance. You speak with clarity. You ask honest questions. You notice things others overlook. And without trying, you change the emotional temperature of the space. This isn't your imagination. There's a name for this. It's the mirror effect. When you express a thought that pierces the surface, when you question what others have accepted without reflection, you unconsciously become a mirror. Not a distorted mirror, a painfully clear one. And what do people see when they look into that mirror? Not you, not your truth, but themselves, their doubts, their fears, their borrowed beliefs. Most identities are borrowed, not built, patched together from culture, habits, and unchallenged beliefs. So when they're confronted, even gently, with someone who sees, their internal structure shakes, and their first reaction isn't gratitude, it's resistance. Carl Jung called this confrontation the encounter with the shadow. The unacknowledged parts of ourselves we don't want to see. And when you speak from truth, you're not just sharing ideas. You're triggering the shadow in others. You don't expose them. You reflect them. And that alone is unbearable. Seeing clearly means destroying the illusions that once made life feel safe. And not everyone is ready to do that. So, what do? They flinch. They laugh nervously. They change the subject. They label you too intense, too serious, too complex. But these reactions aren't really about you. They're psychological defense mechanisms. They're how the ego protects itself from perceived threat. You don't threaten because you attack. You threaten because you awaken. And in a world addicted to sedation, awakening feels like violence. Schopenhauer understood this better than most. He observed that high intelligence often leads to isolation, not because the thinker chooses solitude, but because society quietly, and sometimes aggressively, pushes the thinker out. Your presence doesn't fit the script. Your questions disrupt the narrative. And even your silence makes people wonder what they're missing. You don't break through words. You break through presence. You, without intention, are an existential provocation. And so, piece by piece, the world begins to withdraw from you, not out of malice, out of fear, because you remind them of everything they've chosen not to confront. You're the crack in the surface, the tension in the room, the glimmer of light in the dark hallway. And while the world may praise intelligence in theory, it often punishes it in practice, especially when that intelligence becomes introspective, existential, or refuses to conform. So the next time you feel the sting of rejection after simply being honest, remember, you didn't say too much. You said what no one else was willing to hear. And when truth begins to crack the masks of the crowd, what happens next isn't just uncomfortable. It's forbidden territory. Because in the next phase, society doesn't just resist you, it begins to exile you. Truth, in its raw form, is rarely welcomed. Not because it's wrong, but because it shatters the fragile balance that most people spend their lives protecting. We live in a culture built not on truth, but on comfort. Comfort sells. Comfort soothes. Comfort maintains order. Truth, on the other hand, pierces layers. It asks questions no one wants to answer. It demands clarity where ambiguity once felt safe. And that makes it dangerous. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's an ancient pattern embedded in the structure of civilization. Societies have always developed systems to regulate behavior, maintain hierarchy, and preserve shared myths. And when someone introduces perspectives that challenge those myths, they become a threat. Not because they're wrong, but because they might be right. And if they're right, the entire narrative has to change. But people don't want change. They want stability. Even if that stability is built on illusion. Today, that illusion is maintained more effectively than ever. Modern platforms don't inform. They numb. A scroll isn't a search. It's sedation. These platforms aren't designed to deepen thought. They're designed to trigger dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. In short, shallow bursts. The result, a society conditioned to seek stimulation, not understanding. We reward reaction, not reflection. We celebrate confidence, not curiosity. And in this environment, the truth teller becomes inconvenient, a disruption in the rhythm, an interruption to the entertainment. There's a profound difference between the storyteller and the truth teller. The storyteller brings us comfort. They weave narratives that fit our desires. They preserve the myths we've grown fond of. The truth teller, on the other hand, disrupts the script. They pierce the veil. They dissolve the trance. And that makes them unwelcome. These insights into the psychology of deep thinking and social rejection will continue to appear on this channel. Subscribe to explore more about the hidden dynamics between intelligence and society. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He wrote about the concept of will, a driving force behind human behavior. Most people, he believed, I don't want to understand the world. They want to survive it with the least discomfort possible. In that light, the pursuit of truth becomes an act of rebellion. It requires courage to lose what once felt certain, to unlearn, to detach, to stand alone. But society doesn't reward that. It rewards compliance. Students who memorize, not who question. Employees who follow, not who think again. Citizens who agree, not who doubt. And that's why you might feel out of place. Because you're not repeating the pattern. You're interrupting it. Real intelligence isn't passive. It doesn't sit quietly. It investigates. It dismantles. It sees too clearly. And in a world maintained by illusion, clarity becomes a threat. But here's the paradox. While society resists those who break illusions, it also quietly hungers for what they bring. Meaning, depth, substance. So, why reject them? Because protecting the system is easier than rebuilding it. And like any biological system, when threatened, society reacts. But its reaction isn't always violent. It's more subtle than that, more strategic. It isolates you. It makes you the outsider. It labels you as difficult, negative, or too deep. But don't mistake it. This exile isn't punishment. It's confirmation. You're not the misfit. You're the deviation. And deviation, in a system built on uniformity, is always marked as dangerous. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from distance. The quiet that surrounds those who think too much, see too clearly, feel too deeply. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and still felt alone, you know this silence well. It's not loud, but it's heavy. And for those who carry restless minds, that loneliness isn't the exception. It's the rule. It's not failure. It's vision. And vision always comes with distance. History is full of thinkers who were received not with applause, but with rejection. Socrates questioned. And for that, they gave him poison. Galileo was silenced for seeing the stars differently. Because truth, when it contradicts power, becomes heresy. Tesla died alone in a hotel room, while the world celebrated the men who had stolen his ideas. And Schopenhauer, brilliant, isolated, deeply misunderstood in his time, was only honored after he was no longer here to witness it. But the pattern doesn't end there. Simone Weil, the French philosopher and mystic, was ridiculed in life because her compassion was too radical, her intelligence too uncompromising. Nietzsche wrote in Isolation, often mocked by colleagues and labeled unstable. But today, his insights shape modern existential thought. Alan Turing, the mind behind the foundation of computers, was criminalized and erased by the very society his genius helped save. Here's the thread that connects them all. Not weakness, but vision. You're not being left behind. You're going ahead. Loneliness, in this context, isn't punishment. It's a signal. It means you're no longer living in the collective dream. You've stepped outside the script. And that kind of awareness has a price. There's a difference between forced isolation and chosen solitude. The first feels like exile. The second becomes sanctuary. And this is the transformation every deep thinker must eventually make from being pushed out to stepping back intentionally, not out of resentment, but out of preservation. Clarity sharpens in space, and not every space is worthy of the blade of your vision. You realize that not every conversation deserves your energy. Not every room is meant to understand you, and not every silence is empty. Some silence is rich, full, necessary. Loneliness isn't the absence of connection. It's the refinement of it. In a world that demands constant presence, you begin to find power in absence, in stillness, in those rare moments when your mind no longer contracts to fit someone else's comfort zone. And over time, you begin to realize something important. Your loneliness isn't a wound. It's a passage, a ritual of clarity, a realignment of values. It's where the thinker becomes the witness, where noise becomes signal, and where the voice inside you becomes stronger than the silence around you. But this exile, silent, internal, personal, doesn't come from nowhere. And to truly understand its roots, we have to go deeper, because the rejection of deep thought isn't just a cultural reflex. It's hardwired into the very structure of the human brain. You could be the most respectful, a thoughtful, soft-spoken person in the room, and still make others feel uneasy, not because of anything you say, but because of what you represent. When your mind reaches deeper, when your presence holds stillness instead of performance, you quietly break the unwritten rules of the group, and the group senses it. This reaction isn't just social, it's biological. The human brain is programmed for tribal survival. For most of our evolution, being accepted by the group wasn't luxury. It was survival. Being cast out of the tribe meant exposure, starvation, or worse. And though we now live in modern cities, our nervous systems haven't caught up. That ancient fear still lives in us. And here's the paradox. Clarity doesn't signal safety. it signals danger. You're signaling threat. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're different. And in the primitive brain, different equals unsafe. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, lights up not just in response to physical danger, but to anything that challenges emotional and social order. So when you don't laugh at the popular joke, when you pause before answering, when you question what others automatically accept, you become a disruption. You're the glitch in the hive, the pause in the loop, the ripple the system can't smooth, the signal the group doesn't know how to process. In sociology, this is known as group threat theory. Anything that destabilizes group cohesion is instinctively resisted, not through reason, but through rejection. And this rejection is subtle. A shift in tone, a look between people, a slow withdrawal from your presence. You become the intense one, the complicated one, the outsider. But the truth is, you're none of those things. You're simply a mind that refuses to mimic, and that refusal alone can feel like rebellion. Because when most people interact, they're unconsciously performing. They're following social scripts. But you're off script. You ask different questions. You don't play along with shallow consensus. You don't give fake laughter just to belong. And for a group that relies on sameness for safety, you become the thing no one ordered. The mirror they don't want to look into, and the pattern they can't predict. In this way, you're like a stray current inside a nervous system designed for smooth transmission. Not toxic, just incompatible. And because today's society is an amplified version of tribal life, with standardized schools, curated social media bubbles, and algorithms that reward conformity, you're treated like static, a discord, an interruption. But here's the deeper truth. This world wasn't built for minds like yours. It was built to maintain rhythm, not to contain insight. And so, when your very presence shifts the energy, don't be surprised by the unease. That discomfort is ancient. But that doesn't mean you have to shrink. Because what makes you disruptive in shallow spaces makes you essential in meaningful ones. So the question becomes, if you see too much, feel too deeply, and think too far, how do you survive in a world that was never designed for your clarity? When you begin to see clearly in a world built on illusion, you quickly realize something important. Truth doesn't make life easier. It makes it heavier, sharper, more honest. And while clarity can liberate, it can also isolate, if not managed with intention. Because the deeply perceptive mind must also learn to protect itself. Otherwise, what begins as insight can quickly become overload. So the real question isn't just how to think clearly, but how to live clearly, without being crushed under the weight of that awareness. The first step is selection. Not everyone deserves access to the full depth of your mind. This isn't arrogance. It's discernment. Your inner world is complex, and not every environment is designed to contain it. Learn to read the room. Not every conversation requires your full truth. Not every silence needs to be filled with depth. Schopenhauer said, "Never share the depth of your thoughts with those who live on the surface." That's not bitterness. That's strategy. Because the more you reveal inner clarity in the wrong places, the more it gets misunderstood or even weaponized. Use your insight like a mirror, but only show the reflection to those who have the courage to face it. And while the world may not provide you with many safe spaces, you can learn to create your own. Build inner sanctuary. This might be journaling, where your thoughts are allowed to exist without interruption. It might be art, where your depth is transformed into shape, color, movement, or small, intentional communities. People who may be few in number, but rich in presence. Don't seek mass understanding. Seek resonance. One real conversation is worth 100 polite nods. And remember, your solitude isn't a defect. It's sacred space, not escape, but refuge. The world will try to convince you that isolation is failure. But for the perceptive mind, it's often the only place clarity can breathe. Your insight is a flame. Unshielded, it burns. Protected, it guides. But if carefully tended, it can warm others. Illuminate. Heal. So, protect it. Nurture it. And learn when to shield it. Because the goal isn't to dim your light, but to position it, aim it, ground it. That's what it means to live perceptively in a chaotic world. Not by numbing your vision, but by learning to carry it with strength. So when the world gets louder, don't match its volume. Get quieter, more precise, more rooted. And in doing so, you transform pain into power, insight into impact, and loneliness into leadership. And if you can keep that flame alive, even when no one around understands it, then you're ready to discover something rare, something that can't be taught, only revealed. The silent gift of seeing what others cannot. If this exploration of deep thinking and intellectual loneliness resonates with you, subscribe to continue this journey. Because the path of the conscious mind requires both courage and community, even when that community is small. There's a price to seeing what others miss, a cost to thinking in a world that rewards repetition. And yes, it often feels like exile, but it's not exile. It's enlightenment. You were never here to fit in. You're here to wake up, not to entertain the surface, but to protect the signal beneath the noise. You're the keeper of silent light. The mind that sees through illusion, even when no one asks, even when no one applauds. Don't extinguish that light just because the room is full of darkness. Because in a darkened world, clarity isn't arrogance. It's service. If this message resonates with you, write "I see" in the comments below, so others like you can know they're not alone. And if you're ready to go deeper, to explore the hidden mechanics of the mind and the invisible forces that shape our reality, watch the next video. Once the veil is lifted, there's no going back, only revelation.